In the early 19th century, the ancient kingdoms of Southeast Asia were entangled in a brutal contest for power, loyalty, and survival. At the heart of this struggle lay Cambodia, fractured land caught in the suffocating grip of two great rivals, Siam to the west and Vietnam to the east. In 1811, a shadowy coast sponsored by Siam would attempt to tear the kingdom in two, plunging it into another war of puppet rulers and foreign bayonets. This was not just a local rebellion, it was a proxy war, a geopolitical chess game where Cambodian sovereignty was the sacrificial pawn. For 2 long years, battles raged in the jungles, cities, and along the rivers of Cambodia. Princes were exiled, thrones were claimed and lost, and the true cost was paid once again by the Cambodian people. This is the story of that forgotten war, a tale of betrayal, ambition, and survival. This is the Broken Mandala, Part 1, Seeds of Rivalry. The year was 1811. Cambodia, already a fractured kingdom caught between the ambitions of its neighbors, now stood on the edge of a precipice. The Mekong's gentle flow betrayed no hint of the storm about to erupt, one that would not be fought by its people alone, but by the hands of two rival giants, from the west Siam, from the east Vietnam, and in between, Cambodia battered, divided, and again made the pawn in a ruthless game for control. Cambodia's king at the time, Ang Chan II, ruled a fragile realm under the ever-growing shadow of the Nugent lords in Vietnam. His reign was marked by uneasy dependence. Vietnamese advisors moved freely through his court. Their troops, under the guise of protection, watched from afar. To Ang Chan, this alliance had become the lesser evil preferable to the grip of Siam, whose previous invasions had left the land in ruin. But to his rivals within the Cambodian royal family, Vietnam's presence was a humiliation. Among those rivals stood Prince Ang Sen Guan, a younger brother to the king. Sen Guan, restless and ambitious, saw the king's closeness to Vietnam as cowardice, a betrayal of Cambodian independence. But his anger was not simply patriotic, it was calculated. With the support of the Siamese court in Bangkok, MC Guan had spent years preparing for what he believed was his destiny, to overthrow his brother and become the sovereign ruler of Cambodia. What followed would become one of the darkest chapters of foreign interference in Cambodia's royal affairs. At the heart of this power struggle were two empires that saw Cambodia not as an equal, but as a buffer state, a tool to use, manipulate, and claim. Siam, under the newly established Chakri dynasty, had expanded aggressively under King Rama I, having taken Battambang and Siem Reap in 1794. Siam had already begun to transform western Cambodia into de facto Siamese provinces. Now, Bangkok eyed Phnom Penh and the Central Plains, hoping to install a friendly regime and roll back Vietnamese influence. For Siam, Prince Ang San Guan was the perfect candidate, loyal, willing, and hungry for power. The plot began to take form in early 1811. Under Siamese instructions, Sen Guan quietly fled the royal capital of Phnom Penh, making his way west to Battambang province, then under the control of Siam's appointed governor, Phra Aphevyu Bet Bahen. Bahen, Khmer collaborator who served Siam with brutal efficiency, welcomed the prince. It was from Battambang that the coup would be launched. The Siamese plan was bold but simple. Arm and support Ang San Guan with troops and weapons. March into central Cambodia, oust King Ang Chan, and declare San Guan the new monarch under Siamese protection. In return, San Guan would cede influence over Cambodia's affairs and allow Siam to formalize control over western and central territories, a puppet on the throne and Siamese troops in his shadow. By mid-1811, Siamese forces began to gather. Their mobilization was disguised as a Khmer internal matter, but few were fooled. Armies moved from the direction of Eraniel Prophet toward Battambang and Persept. At the same time, San Guan, with a band of loyalists, issued a call to arms against his brother, declaring that Ang Chan had betrayed Cambodian sovereignty to the Vietnamese. The propaganda struck a chord with some factions in the countryside. particularly in areas weary of Vietnamese administrators and forced labor levies. But King Ang Chan was not blind. From his court in Phnom Penh, he watched as events unfolded with mounting dread. He knew he could not face a two-front war alone. His own army was small, scattered, and unreliable. Internal divisions plagued his officials, and the people had grown tired of constant royal infighting. Worse, many of the royal elite remained sympathetic to Sengwan, secretly favoring Siam over Vietnam. Faced with this existential threat, Ang Chan made a decision that would shape Cambodia's future for decades. He turned once more to Vietnam. He sent urgent appeals to Gia Long, the founder of Vietnam's Nguyen dynasty, who had only recently unified his country and was consolidating power. Gia Long responded swiftly, dispatching reinforcements across the border into southern Cambodia. Vietnam's response was not altruistic, it was strategic. For Gia Long, Cambodia served as a buffer against Siamese expansion. Allowing Siam to install a puppet prince in Phnom Penh would weaken Vietnam's southern flank and embolden Bangkok. By defending Ang Chan, Vietnam would preserve its dominance in the region and tighten its grip on Cambodia's internal politics. By late 1811, Siamese-backed forces under Ang Sengwan had taken several provincial centers near the Tonle Sap, including Pursat and Kompong Chenang. Khmer defectors joined in droves. Sensing the shift in momentum, Phnom Penh, though fortified, stood increasingly isolated. Ang Chan's appeals for loyalty rang hollow in a capital where food was scarce and hope even scarcer. The Vietnamese arrived just in time. Under the command of Nguyen Van Thuy and other seasoned generals, Vietnamese reinforcements set up defensive positions near the Mekong Delta and began to push northward. Their presence re-energized Ang Chan's court and sent a chilling message to the rebels. This would not be a quick quit, would be a grinding war. The conflict, though never officially declared a war between Siam and Vietnam, escalated rapidly. In early 1812, Vietnamese and Siamese troops clashed near O Dong and along the Tonle Sap. Villages were torched, rice fields trampled. Khmer, civilians caught between opposing armies, suffered terribly. Some fled to the forests, others to Vietnamese-held enclaves, while many were pressed into forced labor by both sides. Cambodia had once again become a war zone not of its own making. As the months dragged on, the Siamese forces supporting SNG-1 began to falter. Supply lines stretched thin. Resistance in the eastern provinces stiffened as Vietnamese reinforcements continued to pour in from Saigon. Sengwan, though initially welcomed in some regions, lost popular support as the war dragged on, and Siamese troops were accused of looting temples and conscripting peasants. Ang Chan, emboldened by Vietnamese support, launched a counteroffensive in mid-1812. He regained control of O Dong with Vietnamese backing, forcing Sengwan to retreat toward Battambang. Along the way, reprisals were swift and brutal. Suspected collaborators were executed. Entire villages were burned to deny shelter to the retreating rebels. The war was no longer just about thrones, it had become a purge. In Battambang, Sengwan made a final stand, but the writing was on the wall. Vietnamese forces now threatened the Siamese supply bases. Faced with mounting losses and pressure at home, the Siamese court under King Rama II decided to withdraw. Their gamble had failed. Sngom, once the would-be king, was forced to flee deeper into Siamese territory, where he would live the rest of his days as an exile. By early 1813, the rebellion was over. King Ang Chan, bruised but victorious, returned to a ravaged kingdom. Vietnamese advisors now filled his court. Their soldiers remained stationed in key towns. Cambodia, though technically independent, was more under Vietnamese control than ever before. The Siamese had lost this round, but the war for Cambodia's soul was far from over. Part 2. The Shadow Kings. The dry season of 1811 had arrived. The Mekong flowed low, sluggish and brown beneath the burning sun. Across its banks, a silent tension swept through Cambodia. From O Dong to Phnom Penh, and into the countryside beyond. The land was once again a pawn on the chessboard of imperial ambitions, a fragile kingdom caught between two rising powers. In the west, Siam, ruled by the new Chakri dynasty, was determined to reshape Indochina in its image. In the east, Vietnam's Nguyen dynasty sought to assert its own version of influence. And in the middle stood a crown with no stable head. Prince Ang Chan, officially crowned king with Vietnamese support, found his rule increasingly undermined by his own brothers and by the ever-growing pressure of Siamese interference. Prince Ang Snz1, his younger brother, had long harbored ambitions of his own. He believed that Ang Chan had grown too close to the Vietnamese court, compromising Cambodia's independence. This belief was convenient for Siam. In 1811, the Siamese court sent a discreet envoy to Singwon, promising alms, gold, and royal favor if he would rise against his brother and swear loyalty to Bangkok. The proposition was not new. For decades, Siam had used this tactic, supporting rival princes, stirring civil war, and then arriving under the guise of protecting order. Prince Sangwon, fueled by anger and a desire for revenge, accepted. What followed was swift. In late 1811, he staged a coup in Odong with Siamese backing. With a small but heavily armed force, he took the capital, declared Ang Chan deposed, and named himself Cambodia's rightful king. Many nobles were either coerced or bribed into switching sides. Those who refused were imprisoned or worse. Singwon declared allegiance to the Siamese king, Rama II, and requested military support to defend his new throne. Siam responded immediately. By the start of 1812, Siamese troops entered Cambodian territory under the command of Chow Phraya Yamarat, bringing more than 10,000 soldiers and war elephants. They entered Odong as liberators, welcomed by the new usurper king. Meanwhile, King Ang Chan, stripped of his capital, fled toward the Vietnamese frontier, hoping for support from Emperor Jia. The Vietnamese court alluded to the growing Siamese presence, realized that Cambodia was slipping from their influence. They could not allow it. In Hue, the Nguyen emperor convened his ministers. The Siamese had installed a puppet ruler at Odong. Vietnamese interests were at stake. Cambodia had long been the buffer state between Vietnam and Siam, and its fall to Siamese influence would mean a complete redrawing of the regional balance. Emperor Jia, still consolidating his own power after unifying Vietnam, could not allow the encroachment. In the spring of 1812, Vietnamese troops crossed the frontier under the command of General Nguyen von Thuy. They were well trained, disciplined, and carried cannons and muskets forged in Hue. As the Vietnamese approached the capital, Siamese forces and Prince Sengwan retreated from Odong, regrouping farther west. Sengwan, realizing that the Vietnamese army would not stop, requested direct intervention. By mid-1812, Siam reinforced its presence, deploying additional divisions under General Phraya Ratchasutpawati. These troops moved toward Battambang and Pasat, aiming to halt Vietnamese advance and retain control over the west. Meanwhile, King Ang Chan returned to Cambodia under Vietnamese escort. He re-established himself in Phnom Penh and declared SM Guan a traitor. Though restored, his rule was fragile, propped up entirely by foreign arms. The civil war had deeply scarred the kingdom. Villages were burned, pagodas were desecrated, loyalties had been tested. Cambodians, caught in the middle, suffered the most. Tens of thousands were displaced, some fleeing into the jungle, others crossing into Vietnam or Siamese territory. Disease and famine followed. Each power, the Siamese, the Vietnamese, and the rival princes, claimed legitimacy. But on the ground, there was only devastation. This was not just a war of thrones, it was a war of shadows. Both Siam and Vietnam claimed to protect Cambodia's sovereignty, yet each used the Khmer monarchy as a facade for deeper regional ambitions. In this proxy war, the Cambodian king was a ghost alive, yet powerless. In Odong, the Siamese-backed faction tried to rebuild, but their authority extended little beyond the city walls. In Phnom Penh, Ang Chan ruled with Vietnamese troops stationed at his gates. There was no true independence, only the illusion of choice between masters. Still, the Vietnamese held a strategic edge. Their army was larger, better supplied, and stationed deep within Cambodian territory. By the end of 1812, Siamese generals realized that a full-scale war would only drain their resources. Bangkok faced unrest at home and instability in Lana. Reluctantly, they pulled back major forces, leaving Prince Singwon to fend for himself. The usurper king, abandoned by his patrons, fled Odong and retreated west, toward Siamese lands. His brief reign collapsed. King Ang Chan was once again confirmed as the ruler of Cambodia, but his crown was now firmly tied to Hue. In 1813, a new treaty was signed between the Cambodian and Vietnamese courts. In it, Ang Chan agreed to deeper integration with Vietnamese authority. Cambodian officials would be appointed with Vietnamese consultation. Vietnamese troops would remain stationed in key locations, and most crucially, Cambodia would send regular tribute, not just gold and ivory, but laborers and rice. Siam had failed in its coup attempt, but Vietnam's victory came with a cost. The country it protected had become a client state in all but name. Cambodia's independence had not been restored, only traded. The people knew it. In the countryside, murmurs spread. The king was not his own man. The Khmer court had become a shadow court. Puppet kings, shadow generals, foreign armies cloaked in royal ceremonies. Across Cambodia, these were not kings, they were ghosts, presiding over a kingdom that no longer truly existed. The temples of Odong stood silent. The monasteries of Phnom Penh burned incense for the dead. A once proud civilization, heir to Angkor's glory, was now trapped between two hungry wolves. The War of 1811 to 1813 was not the last. It was merely a prelude to a century of invasions, occupations, betrayals, and treaties signed under duress. Yet, even in the darkest hours, the Khmer spirit endured. A nation can be broken, occupied, or betrayed, but not erased. In every village that rebuilt, in every child taught the language, in every story passed down by elders under starlight, Cambodia remembered. And history, though written by victors, always whispers the truth for those who dare to listen. Part 3. The Phantom Crown. When the rains returned in 1812, they came not just to nourish the earth but to erase blood from it. In the forests outside Phnom Penh, the remnants of Cambodia's royal army retreated, defeated and divided. The coup that Siam had so carefully plotted had begun to unravel. King Ang Chan, backed by Vietnamese reinforcements, was not only alive, he was gaining strength. From the ashes of Phnom Penh's smoking ruins, Cambodia's sovereign prepared his vengeance. But even as Ang Chan moved to reclaim his throne, the land he sought to govern had become a chessboard haunted by phantom Siamese agents, Vietnamese officers, and Khmer princes, each claiming legitimacy in a kingdom of shifting shadows. As 1813 dawned, the campaign took on a different form, not outright battles, but raids, sieges, and assassinations. Ang Squan, the prince installed by Siam, held Odong with what remained of the pro-Siamese faction. From his court, Squan issued decrees in Ang Chan's name, claimed to be the true king, and sought to rally Cambodia's scattered nobles to his side. But the land no longer listened. The ordinary Khmer people, scorched by Siamese occupation and grieving their burned capital, increasingly turned to Vietnam for deliverance, however painful that alternative might be. Nguyen Van Thoe and Nguyen Van Nan, two Vietnamese generals dispatched by Jia Long, moved swiftly to restore Ang Chan. With discipline honed in the long campaigns of Vietnamese unification, they avoided direct confrontation with Siamese strongholds and instead focused on isolating and breaking the pro-Siamese faction's supply lines. They occupied Takeo and the Mekong Delta routes, cutting off Ang Sangwan from coastal support and pushing Siamese troops further west. Siamese forces, stretched thin across multiple frontiers and growing wary of prolonged entanglement, began to withdraw in phases. General Badindaka, still in his early career at this point, advocated for a consolidated retreat to Battleground, where Siam still held firm control. King Rama I too was concerned. The Burmese threat in the west was re-emerging, and his army's prolonged campaign in Cambodia had yielded little beyond a burned capital and thousands of dead. By mid-1813, Odong was surrounded. Vietnamese cannon echoed across the Tonle Sap plains, and the once prosperous capital braced for another siege. Ang Sngwan, the puppet prince, realized his position was untenable. Rather than surrender, he chose exile, fleeing west with his remaining loyalists into Siam's embrace. Odong fell without resistance, and just like that, the second phase of Siam's intervention crumbled. Ang Chan returned to his ravaged kingdom, not as a triumphant liberator, but as a battered survivor. Phnom Penh had been destroyed. Odong was in shambles. The royal treasury was gone, and so were many of the kingdom's scholars, monks, and artisans. He moved his court to the southern banks of the Mekong, choosing a smaller settlement that would eventually become the new Phnom Penh. It was not a capital, it was a compromise. But victory came at a cost. To reclaim his throne, Ang Chan had submitted fully to Vietnamese protection. In return, Vietnam began to integrate Cambodia deeper into its sphere. Military garrisons were established in Phnom Penh. Vietnamese customs and laws slowly took root. Gia Long demanded that Ang Chan send regular tribute and accept a Vietnamese royal seal, further diminishing Cambodia's sovereignty. What had once been a Khmer kingdom caught between two giants had now become a client state under the shadow of one. Still, many Khmer saw this as the lesser evil. Siam had burned their cities, stolen their relics, and forced princes upon them. Vietnam, though heavy-handed, at least restored some semblance of order and allowed Ang Chan to rule. But beneath the surface, a bitter truth remained. Cambodia had no power of its own. Its crown was no longer forged in gold and jade, but in phantom illusions dictated by foreign capitals. Meanwhile, in Bangkok, King Rama I accepted the loss with quiet bitterness. Siam had failed to place a king in Phnom Penh, but it still held Battambang and Siem Reap, crucial provinces seized in earlier campaigns. These territories would become key to Siam's continued influence in western Cambodia. Pro-Siamese officials governed them. Taxes were sent to Bangkok, and temples once Khmer were now maintained in Siamese fashion. For Rama I, it was not total victory, but neither was it a full retreat. The deeper tragedy lay not in battle, but in identity. The Cambodian royal family had become fractured beyond repair. Ang Sangwan and other exiled princes remained in Siam, occasionally used as political pawns. Ang Chan, now effectively a Vietnamese vassal, was mistrusted by his own court. Khmer nobles were split, unsure which master to obey or how to preserve what little was left of their dignity. This was the true legacy of the 1811 to 1813 coup attempt, not simply a failed invasion, but the disintegration of independent rule. Cambodia's royal crown, once a symbol of divine authority rooted in Angkor's grandeur, had become a ghost, a phantom worn by rulers who answered to foreign emperors and kings. The throne no longer ruled from will alone, but by permission. Even religion was not spared. Siamese forces had taken sacred relics, including Buddha statues and manuscripts, during their occupation. Vietnamese administrators, too, began to reshape Khmer Buddhism to reflect Hanoi's interests. Temples were rebuilt under foreign guidance. Monks who resisted were exiled or silenced. The soul of Cambodia, its faith, language, and leadership, became increasingly dictated by outsiders. And yet, amid this sorrow, life continued. Farmers returned to flooded rice fields. Traders reopened ruined markets. Children were born who would one day forget the names of Ang Singwan and Nguyen Van Thoi, but they would live in a kingdom still not truly free, still pulled between giants. Ang Chan ruled until 1834, always in the shadow of Vietnam. After his death, the cycle of foreign manipulation would repeat again and again. Siam and Vietnam would continue their tug-of-war over Cambodia for decades to come. And though kings were crowned, temples built, and treaties signed, the phantom crown remained. It haunted every ruler, every rebellion, every act of resistance. Because in the end, Cambodia had never truly been allowed to heal. Its sovereignty had become a myth, its independence a mirage, and its crown a relic worn by ghosts. And that's where this chapter ends. The 1811 to 1813 Siamese-backed coup attempt may be a lesser-known war, but its consequences would echo for generations, shaping the future of Cambodia's monarchy, its borders, and its soul. Until next time, stay safe, and see you in the next history.